All right, I have 10 of Chamber likes to do things on time. We'll get going. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Gavin McDonald. I'm a partner at the law firm of Cox and Palmer here in Halifax, and I'm also chair of the board of directors of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. Today, I'm going to be your host. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar, Navigating COVID-19, regarding leadership and human resources considerations in reopening. Many businesses are facing similar challenges when it comes to ensuring a safe and engaging work environment post-COVID. Today's webinar is going to cover physical reintegration, continuing virtual work, and key leadership and human resources considerations. You will all have an opportunity to ask questions on how to prepare, plan, and implement safe and successful reintegration of your teams to on-site work. And if you have any questions during the course of the presentation, we ask you to type it into the Q&A box in Zoom. If you choose to chat in the chat, if you choose to comment in the chat box, we encourage you to address your message to panelists and all attendees so everyone can see the post, as it may be of interest to other people. There is also an option to address your message to all panelists, which only I and Susan, the presenter, will be able to see. So with those logistical comments out of the way, I'd like to introduce Susan Power, founder and PowerUp Leadership, Inc., our presenter today. Susan has held executive human resources roles, has founded a human resources consulting business, and is currently president of the Atlantic chapter of International Coach Federation. Susan understands the challenges of entrepreneurship firsthand and believes inspired leaders should excite, encourage, and instill confidence in others. Welcome, Susan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Gavin, and thank you everybody for being here today. Welcome to Friday. And yes, I'm very pleased to be here talking about reopening from an HR perspective in key leadership considerations. My firm, PowerUp Leadership, is based in Halifax. We've been around for 2 years, and our mantra is multiply your leaders to grow. My experience working in human resources over the years, I've worked in HR my entire career in the coaching space, is that when leadership effectiveness is right, it skyrockets employee productivity and it results in increased profit as a result of that. So I think, our leadership skills have definitely been tested in this pandemic and post-pandemic environment. So I'm going to share with you some of the best practices I've come across in terms of reintegrating into the workplace from a leadership perspective and HR perspective. My background, I am certified HR leader, been a certified coach through ICF, and very proud of my 2 sons, William and James. And it's certainly been an interesting experiment with the work from home situation, homeschooling kids. I'm sure many of you are in the same boat. And we've had, as employers, to be very flexible with employees in terms of getting the work done. And we'll continue to have to be so as some workplaces reopen their physical workplace. In terms of the agenda today, I'm going to start with talking a bit about resilience, mental health, and how we can support employees going forward as we reopen our workplaces, and some workplaces continue with a remote work from home model where that works for certain positions. Talk a bit about communicating expectations in terms of safety expectations and new policies and procedures to employees and customers as we reopen our physical workplaces. How to prepare a return to the workplace plan. If you don't have one of these in hand, this is kind of the first step before you reopen your doors to employees. So talk about how you can start to put that together and some key considerations, as well as HR policies, new HR policies that you may need to put in place based on COVID-19 and some of the changes that we've had to make in terms of practices and procedures for employees. And then at the end, we'll open it up. We'll leave at least 10, maybe 15 minutes for Q&A. So yeah, if you have any pressing questions that come up, please feel free to pop them in the chat, or you'll have an opportunity to ask if you'd rather ask in person at the end of the presentation. This quote to me really sums up what we've been going through since March now. I can't believe it's been that long. Creativity requires the courage to let go of certainties. So none of us saw this coming. Clearly, we didn't see this coming going into 2020. And I think there's been a lot of anxiety and fear around this virus. And as employers are now reopening their doors, I think that's a really key area from an HR lens to hone in on to help employees alleviate some of this anxiety. Of course, we cannot alleviate all of it, but through clear communication, planning, and having employees have a chance to ask their questions about reopening plans and to know what's expected, we know that helps alleviate anxiety, just having the information on hand and knowing what measures the employer has taken to protect employees, both from a health and safety perspective as well as a psychological health and safety perspective. So the good news is, as far as Nova Scotia, we have not had a case of COVID-19 since June the 9th for 16 days. And I think my view is our province has done a stellar job managing this crisis. They've struck the right balance, I think, between taking the right safety measures, but not being overly restrictive. And, you know, there's definitely a balance to be had. Should we, God forbid, have a second wave of this virus, you know, it's economically debilitating when we shut down our businesses, especially to small business owners. And there's a balance to be had between the public health interests in mitigating economic dissemination, essentially, that as the bubble continues to open, our Atlantic bubble is opening, I think it's in a week time, we're going to have to continue to be vigilant as employees return to the workplace and, you know, kind of get used to being back there. We need to continue to take these risk mitigation measures so we can do our best to avoid any future COVID cases. So what's happening to people and organizations since this pandemic came at us in March? We know that mental health has been a real factor. It's been really stressful for all of us. Everybody has lost something in the situation, whether it was a canceled vacation, a missed graduation, not seeing family out of province, the financial uncertainty, for those employed as well as those who may have businesses or a spouse that may be impacted through a layoff, and having kids at home full time. I love my 7-year-old, I love my 10-year-old, you know, but you can only give them so many freezies to keep them quiet during work calls and so many YouTube videos. It's a lot on people's plates to homeschool kids and work full time and be effective in both camps. So, you know, as employees, as business owners, as parents, as members of our community, it's been a lot. And we know that as far as mental health goes, this lack of social connection has been taxing on us. And luckily, you know, I feel like we're kind of reaching the other side, or at least starting to. But Zoom is not equivalent for true social connection. It's not the same as when you're in the office and you can kind of shoot the breeze around the water cooler and, you know, have a picnic and have a family barbecue and get together in groups, weddings, that type of thing. So many of us have been running on adrenaline for the past few months, and it's been very tiring for people. And I keep hearing people say that they're zoomed out through all these Zoom calls. So I think that's important to acknowledge and to, you know, acknowledge to our employees that we know you have been going above and beyond to be productive, and thank you. We recognize that. As employers, we will continue to be flexible and trust our employees to get the job done and be flexible, because we know this has been very taxing on people. So resilience, we've been hearing a lot about this lately, and Sandra, we have a poll. We're going to queue up 2 questions that we'd like you to answer about your workplace and resilience. And we'll share with you the results of these 2 questions. So the first one, does your organization offer external leadership coaching to employees on topics like resilience, work-life balance, stress management, leadership coaching? 42% yes, 42% no, 16% I don't know. What about question 2? Would you see employees benefiting from resilience coaching right now as part of your return to the physical workplace plan? So the majority, 85%, are saying yes. So that's good. So maybe this will give you some ideas of the type of things you can include in the return to workplace plan around resilience. So thank you for participating in that, everybody. So a couple of questions around resilience, and if you have a response to any of these, feel free just to raise your hand and we'll hear from 3 or 4 of you. But specific to your workplace, what are you doing to maintain your personal resilience as an individual during this time? How do you define or communicate resilience to your staff? Have you experienced any resistance around the topic of resilience and having this type of conversation with employees? And what are you doing to help your employees cultivate greater resilience? So Sandra, anyone with a hand up or anything in the chat that folks are sharing?
Yeah, no hand up yet, but if anybody has an answer, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Or you can answer in the chat box below.
So what do you think about when you think about resilience?
Susan, maybe it's Gavin, maybe I'll jump in here.
Please.
And I think the one thing that's come down to me, because resilience, at least in my mind, often implies strength, which can sometimes think of it as toughness, but I think flexibility has been key in this, like people willing to try new things or try to do things in new ways. So I think that's one thing I've been talking with both internally and with a lot of other employers is just, you've got to be flexible in order to achieve your business goals right now.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Gavin. I agree with that 100%. Absolutely. And when I think of resilience, I think of fueling yourself, the self-care element, whether it's getting out for a walk, taking a bike ride, doing yoga, meditation, the type of things that help you just de-stress so you can be there and be effective as a team lead for your employees or for your clients. And it's almost a day-to-day muscle, I think, that some days are easier than others. But we know that there's been a huge spike. One of the industries that's done very well during this pandemic is the wine industry, sale of alcohol, that there's been a huge spike in alcohol sales. And as an HR professional, there's a lot of concern that I have, and I know different HR associations have expressed that as employees begin to return to the workplace, there's going to be a spike in addiction issues. It just stands to reason based on the numbers. And that's something to be vigilant about, and to ensure your employees have access to an EAP program and have resilience strategies in place so people can cope in more healthy ways with this ongoing stress that they will face as they return to the workplace. Any other comments?
Susan, I just see one in the chat that I'll just share with everybody. Deneen writes, having one-on-one discussions and group discussions about what employees need, as a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. That's really important, I think, to ask employees what they need. And it may be different from one person to the next. I do a lot of coaching, and I was having a coaching conversation with the executive in the US in a larger center in the manufacturing space. And there's been a lot more COVID in their region in the US. And every time I would ask him about resilience, he would turn to action planning and, we're doing this, we're doing that. And he very much threw himself into his job and wanted to be there for his employees. And I'd circle back and ask about resilience. What are you doing for yourself to be resilient for employees? And he wasn't answering the question. And finally, I just blurted out, whether right or wrong, I just said, you seem really sad. And he stopped in his tracks, and it was a completely different conversation at that point. And I think it was a light bulb moment for him that, he needed to do more self-care activities, and he was feeling a level of stress that perhaps he wasn't even aware of until that moment. And I think as a manager in an organization, our employees don't always tell us what they need. It's certainly, you want to ask them, some will tell you, but some won't. And constantly circling back and, clarifying what you hear and what they may or may not be saying can be helpful to folks building resilience.
And we have a comment from Paula, who has a comment about challenges. Paula, jump on in.
Hi there, thanks. I just had a bit of a comment. One of the challenges, or one of the feedbacks that we're receiving, or that I've heard around
Resilience.
Resilience and well-being, is that there's so much information out there, and people are being inundated with information about how to cope with COVID-19, or how to cope in the workplace, or coping with return to work. And it's really, how do we point people in the right direction with valid information and good information?
Yeah, that's a good point. There has been a ton of information around this, definitely. And I think it depends on the type of information you're looking for. But having one strategy I've seen organizations have is a COVID-19 response team, that they're deciding what communication channels are used to communicate with employees about what type of information. Everything doesn't need to be pushed out by email. That can often be our tendency. I attended a webinar with Hydro Ottawa, and they mentioned they had a intranet page where they would post information to communicate with employees so they could access it, in one spot without it all coming to their email and kind of flooding them. So I thought that was one good practice. But thank you for highlighting that. It's a good point.
Just to pick up on that point, Susan, one thing, sorry, I'm sure you probably want to move on, but just to pick
please.
up on one question. One thing I've heard internally is managers struggling with the balance of not overloading people and with information and thereby increasing their stress. Have you any words on how do you find that balance, or how do you, or what are your thoughts on that concern as expressed by some managers that I've spoken to?
Yeah, that's a good question, Gavin. I think having the one-on-one, just the impromptu phone call with an employee for a manager, because Zoom is such a structured environment. It's not like a face-to-face meeting. It's very different when you're on a team Zoom call, but just checking in regularly and asking employees, how are you doing today? What's your stress level like? Some teams are doing this rose and thorn activity where they'll start off a meeting with what's your thorn, what's kind of your stress point this week, and then ending on an up note, what's your rose, what are you grateful for? And just continuously checking in, because people are on a bit of a roller coaster right now, and they might be fine one week, but then something happens or the stress just boils up for them, that it can vary. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for raising that. So another strategy as far as resilience is coaching. And ICF, International Coach Federation, ICF defines coaching as a partnership with a client that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. So you can search up certified coaches on the ICF global website. There's a lot of them out there. I encourage you to find a certified coach because they have quite a high standard. To get certified through ICF, you have to have so many paid hours of coaching time and go through a bunch of requirements that they have in place. But the benefit of working with an external coach is that it's a different relationship than an internal stakeholder like HR or your manager, that they don't have the political interest. They're not determining your compensation increases, your performance reviews. So it's a very different conversation, and with someone that knows how to perform coaching. And a lot of coaching resources right now are focused on resilience because stress management impedes productivity. And it's just a big topic of conversation right now that coaches are having with clients. So that's another strategy as well. In terms of new leadership in the post-pandemic world, we are hearing a lot about this today, that this has been a real wake-up call for people, a real paradigm shift. And it's really given us pause to evaluate our entire lives. We've had almost a timeout from the universe where we've had a lot of reflection time, whether we wanted it or not. I think it's one of the benefits that we've experienced through this pandemic. And it's a new type of leadership that employees want going forward. I encourage you just to pop into the chat bar your thoughts in terms of what this new leadership might look like and why coaching may be even more important now than ever. Any comments in the chat around new leadership post-pandemic world? None? Okay, well, one thing that comes to mind for me is I'm hearing a lot about empathy, that really checking in. Every employee is different, and really connecting with an employee and putting people first over profits is so important right now, and just that continual check-in with them. In terms of coaching and its role with leadership, we know that coaching helps people reach their potential, and many of the most successful companies, biggest Fortune 500 companies, is kind of their secret sauce for helping high potential employees, not just executive employees. And just like an athlete has a coach to help them improve their performance, it's no different when you're a professional. A coach can help you see your blind spots, can ask you questions that result in insights, help you realize your goals. The ROI of coaching is shown to be between 5.7 to 7 times return on investment. And I think it's an under-tapped resource from many employers I've worked with. Often they don't understand what it is, and they think it's the same thing as mentoring. And if you haven't experienced coaching, working with a coach yourself, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around it. But it's definitely worth looking into and learning more about as a talent management strategy. ICF, the global ICF Federation, does a consumer awareness study every 2 years on coaching, and the latest results for 2019 come out this September. So these are the latest results right now that we have access to, 2017. The yellow bar is Canada, the blue bar is global. So they survey close to 8,000 companies. So we can see how Canada varies here in the graph. But the biggest benefits of both professional business coaching and life coaching for Canada, 48% say increased productivity, improved communication skills, 40%, 40% improved work-life balance, 32% expand professional career opportunities. So lots of benefits to be had. One that's probably quite relevant today, increased well-being, 34%. So in terms of reopening our workplaces, the first step is to ensure we have a plan put together. And this is quite a busy slide, but it's from CDC's website. They have a lot of wonderful resources for reopening workplaces. And it's essentially a process diagram to determine, are you ready to reopen? So you can go through it yourself in your own time, but it's essentially, do you have the basic health and safety actions in place, sanitation practices, social distancing? Some organizations have had to reconfigure their entire workplace in terms of spreading out cubicles, putting up plexiglass partitions and the like, depending on the type of environment they work in, manufacturing in particular. Is ongoing monitoring in place? Do you have new policies, procedures in place, signage up if you can only have so many people in your workplace at a time? Have you communicated out the new policies to employees? So it's a constant process of ongoing monitoring and staying in consultation with health authorities as the situation evolves. So before reopening the physical workplace, some key steps that need to happen are communicating your reopen plan to employees. So once you have a plan together, to communicate it to employees to help them understand what is expected of them before they come back on site. Do they need a mask? How many people can be in the office at once? Do you have a rotating schedule? And also a business update as well. What's the sales forecast? If you have employees that have been temporarily laid off, they'll be very interested, as will all staff, as to how is the business recovering from this pandemic? What safety measures has the employer taken so that I can feel safe coming back to work? Social distancing, the 2 meter 6 foot rule is standard practice. Reducing the numbers on site. Some employers I'm working with locally are doing rotating schedules where it's 50% work from home, 50% on site, and then they can have half the employees on site on those off days. Visitor policy, are you allowing visitors to come into your workplace? If so, have them sign in so you have a track record of their contact information and the date they were there should there be a COVID case. And just reducing the frequency of in-person meetings, one person in the lunchroom ideally, just to keep the whole number of people social distancing in place is a good practice. And continuing to accommodate employees. We'll have to continue working from home, especially for those employees that have children. Summer camps, I know there's a number of online summer camps, but I haven't heard of any yet in Halifax area for childcare for working parents, and daycares are at 50% capacity. So employers, to Gavin's point earlier, need to continue to be flexible and results focused in that continual communication loop with employees in terms of schedule. You know, you don't need to be at your computer 9 to 5 to be producing results. Employees may prefer to have a flexible schedule, and certain jobs permit for that. And the mental health piece, that needs to be part of the return to work plan as well. What resilience resources have you provided to employees? Have you given them a snapshot of your EAP program? What's offered in terms of counseling, financial counseling, wellness counseling, psychological counseling? Do you have coaching available as a resource for employees? And a lot of employers have really taken advantage of this opportunity for online learning for their employees because they've had a bit of downtime in terms of demand from customers. So the smart employers have really encouraged their employees as much as their bandwidth will allow with everything else going on. But if they have a spare hour, take an online course, use it as an opportunity to position yourself for moving forward. In terms of alleviating employee anxiety about what to expect before they come back, a lot of questions about, what PPE do I need in the workplace? What's in place in terms of sanitation products, wipes to wipe down shared equipment like a photocopier or a shared printer, the fridge, the doorknobs, anything that has multiple people touching it, and just to maintain optimal sanitation practices, asking the landlord if you have a cleaner for your building, what's changed in terms of your cleaning processes. We want to communicate it to our staff so they understand what's being done to protect them. And working from home policy. Many employers I've talked to are continuing to allow their employees to work from home even 100%, at least until December. And why not? It's been a real opportunity for us in Atlantic Canada. I think it's really opened up the marketplace where we're talent now for the entire world because we can work remotely. So if you're a small business owner, I used to experience this as a coach, that I'd be dealing with large coaching firms in the US, and they say, when we have an opportunity in Canada, we'll contact you. And I'd say, well, why does it matter? I'm on Zoom. And now it's completely changed. The conversation's completely changed, that yeah, what does it matter? We're all working from home. So there's benefits of this for us in the small market. I think we need to take advantage of. And any short-term changes made to your travel policy, vacation, sick leave policies need to be communicated to staff in advance of returning to the workplace. If they leave the province, do you permit them to come into the workplace? Do they need to quarantine for 14 days? Once the country reopens, whenever that is, what's the employer's policy if an employee leaves the country? Do they need to work from home for 14 days? And in terms of your workplace plan, it's a best practice to really engage your Occupational Health and Safety Committee or your OHS rep to ensure they're on board with any new policies you have and the ongoing risk assessment of the workplace and anything related to health and safety. And having a point person for COVID-19 matters. If employees have questions, they should certainly be able to ask their manager and have everyone kind of singing from the same song book, but having someone that's coordinating this and kind of managing the communication overall in terms of COVID-19 is a good practice. Another thing I think employers need to keep in mind is there's going to be different levels of risk. If employees are immunocompromised, have existing health conditions, they will certainly very likely want to continue to work from home. And even just our different risk levels, that we have different perceptions of risk, and some employees are not going to feel safe returning. And my view is let them work from home if their job permits it. Let them come back on their own terms when they're safe, if you can. And it will take some people more time, like it does for any change, to feel comfortable returning to the physical workplace. And one way to help alleviate that anxiety is, to review and communicate your EAP program and sick policy to employees to ensure you have adequate paid sick leave time if an employee needs to avail of it. Perhaps you increase it temporarily during this recovery phase, because the last thing we want to have happen as employers is to have an employee come to the workplace sick because they need to get paid. And that's a real risk that can happen if people don't have paid sick time. This was an example of a poster that I thought was pretty well done in Nova Scotia. It's a preventative risk mitigation poster related to COVID-19. So it highlights for employees what the expectations are, just to remind them to wash their hands, respiratory hygiene like coughing and sneezing, to cover your mouth, and as well as for employers, just to remind them about social distancing. And it's once we get back to the workplace, some of these things we may forget. We've seen in Walmart, if you go to the store, the grocery store, that sometimes the employees working there forget about social distancing. If you do have a case of COVID-19 in the workplace, I certainly hope that none of us do. But if we do, we need to remember that it's employee privacy is very important, that we can't be like, I think it's Steve from The Office, who always hated the HR guy. I don't know why people always hate the HR person, but they often do, is Toby spread COVID-19. No, we can't do that. We need to protect employee privacy as best as possible. So this is CDC Center for Disease Control's guidance for what to do, how to plan for if an employee becomes sick in the workplace. So essentially, procedures need to be in place for, transporting them. We don't want them taking the bus if they are suspected to have symptoms of COVID-19. Certainly, there needs to be a process to notify public health authority and any customers who may have come into contact with that employee, while doing our best to maintain confidentiality. And closing off the area used by the sick person until the necessary cleaning and disinfection has occurred. And it's that whole tracing procedure, and another reason why to have a visitor log if you have clients or visitors come to your workplace, to really be able to trace who may have come into contact with that employee. And certainly, clearly, sick employees cannot return to work until it's cleared by public health to discontinue any home isolation. Some examples on CDC guidance for maintaining a healthy operation. We talked a bit about the flexibility and on the policy side of things, having a telecommuting policy and monitoring absenteeism, mental health. I think we've talked about a lot of this already. In terms of HR practices, the limiting the non-essential travel, that certainly happened just by closing of the borders. But as our Atlantic bubble reopens, employers need to determine, what is their policy on limiting non-essential travel to other work site locations, and to communicate that in advance to employees to ensure they train their managers on any new policies or procedures, just so they're able to monitor and enforce them and ensure their employees understand what's expected. And also vendors and suppliers, to ask them about what measures they've taken to manage the risk of COVID-19, because they can certainly introduce risk in the workplace, and you need to ensure that they're aligned with the health and safety plan that you have as an employer. Key HR considerations: if you've temporarily laid off employees, you need to make a decision. Is it going to be a permanent termination? Are you going to stagger their return based on the financial impact it may have had to the organization? Are they still entitled to be part of your benefits plan based on your benefit provider's policy for part-time employees if they're working part-time or not at all? And how will you continue to respond to requests to continue to work from home? Work refusals, this comes up a lot in terms of questions. What do I do if an employee refuses to come to work because they don't feel safe? It's within their right. An employee can refuse to work if they can prove it's unsafe or likely to be unsafe. But another reason why to have a return to workplace plan and to communicate the safety measures taken. If you've implemented safety measures and every precaution possible and the employee still refuses to come to work, it could be viewed as abandonment of employment or resignation if they don't have a strong reason to do so. If they're immunocompromised, I think that's a strong reason to do so. If you need to accommodate them for family status because they have children and they don't have childcare, that's a strong reason to refuse to return to work and to be accommodated to work from home. Maybe you have an employee that's taken on new job duties because you've laid off or temporarily laid off some employees, and their job is going to change permanently. One key HR consideration is to update their employment agreement if it's changed significantly in terms of their job responsibilities and duties. Perhaps their compensation has changed, or their hours have changed, or their responsibility areas. That needs to be updated. If an employee wants to continue working remotely, this can be assessed on a case-by-case basis and based on the nature of their job, if they're able to do so effectively to work from home. Best practices for leading a virtual team. I'll just highlight here, just because I see we're getting close to time here. Video conferencing. I encourage you, if you have a lot of team calls through Zoom these days, like many of us, encourage your team to turn on their video. It makes it more conducive to communication, to connecting with their team members, even if it's just 1 or 2 meetings a week that are designated video on days. I think that's a good practice for virtual team meetings. So this new leadership going forward, it's really based on trust, is really the foundation of it. This is some questions you can self-assess your own trustworthiness, how well you communicate trust to your staff. Natalie Doyle Oldfield wrote a book, The Power of Trust. She's a local girl in Halifax, has an amazing book, The Power of Trust, that talks a lot about building trust with customers as well as employees. We know we have to get the safety measures in place first for employees to feel safe returning to the workplace and to build that level of trust with employees. Once you have that in place, you can start working on the engagement, the inspiration piece. But we know that an inspired employee is 225% more productive than just a satisfied employee at 100% productive output. So there is a business case for helping employees understand the why of your organization and getting leadership effectiveness right. These are kind of the 3 levels of foundation. Satisfied employees, they have the basics in place, they have the tools to do their job, they have a safe work environment, they're paid fairly, engaged, they are learning, they're making a difference, they're part of a great team. Inspired, they get a lot of meaning from being part of the company, from a lot of meaning from doing their job, and the leaders are role modeling effective leadership. And that's kind of the golden state where we'd like to get to eventually. And I think it takes a lot to get there, but people first over profit seems to be coming up a lot these days. So that's a good starting point, and it goes really far. Bain and Company has highlighted, what are inspirational leadership behaviors, and just getting 4 of these that you see listed here, whether it's co-creating, listening, humility, stress tolerance, emotional expression, follow through, empowerment. If you just get 4 of these behaviors, you, according to their research, will be an inspired leader for your organization and well ahead of the pack. Employee wellness program, certainly a good place to start, and you can build that into your return to the workplace plan. Many benefits for the employer in terms of cost and productivity. How you start designing one, talk to your employees, set some objectives, perhaps have some wellness program incentives like wellness days for people that meet the measures of your program, whether it's going to the gym so many days a week. Absenteeism rates can be another factor. And then measure the program outcomes. Is it reducing your spend on things like, you can track through your EAP program, how many employees are off on sick leave, how many employees are on short-term disability, is it having an impact? So that's my presentation. Sorry, I had to speed up a little bit near the end because I realized I was running out of time, but just last couple announcements here. I have a podcast, Tyler Bailey and myself, free resource. We interview leaders throughout the globe on what is effective leadership. You can sign up on Anchor. Another announcement that I'd like to make that may be very helpful to you as you put together a reopen plan. PowerUp Leadership has a strategic alliance with Britain Management Profiles out of Toronto, and they offer safe workplace products. So PPE products and test kits are all FDA approved. And we work only with direct local manufacturers to get these in place. So if you need anything as you reopen, like hand sanitizers, gloves, masks, feel free to reach out to me and I can provide you with some more information on that. Similarly, I welcome any of you today to reach out to me. You can book a complimentary consultation if you have some questions regarding your own situation, as far as putting together a return to the workplace plan or resilience coaching. Happy to speak to you for 30 minutes, no cost, no obligation, and kind of explore what your employer has in place and where you might need to focus. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Gavin for any questions or final comments.
Well, thanks, Susan. So we do have time for some questions. And so I invite any of the participants to type their question into the Q&A box. But while people are typing away, Susan, maybe I'll just go through some of the comments that came in during your presentation in the chat. From Deb Kendall, who made the comment that this experience, I guess, a lot of employers are realizing jobs can be carried out remotely, which I think is a change. I can certainly say from my business firm, we have a variety of generations working together, and certain ones were very skeptical of whether or not you could be productive remotely, and this has shown difference on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's been great from that standpoint that I think employees have really stepped up and worked remotely, not just worked remotely, but worked remotely with kids at home too, that, wait till the schools will open back up. Imagine how productive people will be then.
Right. From Barbara, with reference to timely coaching, some people don't want to reveal their concerns or worries. How do you reach a person who doesn't want to express their concerns? How can I be timely, empathic, and support them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, you can't force someone to disclose anything they don't want to, but when I'm coaching a client, we start by setting some goals based on, maybe they want to be promoted in the next year. Maybe they want to improve their communication skills, their relationship building skills. So it's very different from one individual to the next. And it takes some time to build that rapport and trust. But I find, and I know I'm a bit biased in this response, but I find as an external person, it's easier to have those candid conversations because there's no double agenda. A manager can be a good coach, but it's always in the back of the mind of the employee. This is the person deciding, my career path, so it's hard to be completely transparent sometimes for people if they don't have that trust with their manager. So I think continuing to do things that build trust, that are in the best interest of your employees, to advocate for them, to ask them what they need, are good places to start.
Now a question from the Q&A. I've read recent articles that employees compensation due to the work at home model. What are your thoughts on this?
Sorry, there was a bit of feedback I didn't catch the full question.
Sorry. This is from an attendee. I've read recent articles that employers may adjust compensation due to the work from home model. What are your thoughts?
To reduce compensation from the...
Or no, may adjust compensation is the way it's phrased.
Okay, adjust compensation. Well, certainly if the employee has reduced hours, if an employee has moved to part-time status, I've seen that with some clients where, maybe they're working, earning up to $1,000 a month and collecting CERB and just working the part-time hours. That would certainly make sense. If they're still performing the same job duties and working from home full-time, I wouldn't see a reason to adjust their compensation from that perspective. I know there's been a lot of employers that have not paid out their bonuses due to the economic impact, and a lot of senior executives I've heard that have made that decision for their company to avoid layoffs, and that's been an impact, and I think the right decision in many respects. So that certainly comes to mind as well. Does that answer the person's question?
Maybe let's jump in the chat. I just want to try to get through as many as we can in the time available. A comment in the chat from Deneen, who finds right now that that there's the group comes in the later afternoon, evening, once things in the home settle down. I guess comment is we will look at staggering, and we have done it in case there is something compromised on a staggered team, so that we still have people who can cover the same duties in an uncompromised team. So in other words, if you've got people working at different hours, you know, as managers, I guess you just have all the relevant time is being covered.
Yeah, and that's a good strategy if people have different preferences in terms of their schedule, and as long as the work gets done, that staggering hours, as long as the work gets done, really what difference does it make when it gets done, if the job permits for it. So definitely. And I've heard of, you know, we don't want people on public transit right now coming to work so all at once during rush hours. So even staggering the start time to be maybe 10 a.m. for those employees that may take public transit, not to ride during the rush period, is another practice.
Well, I can say, at least in downtown Halifax, with so many people away, there is no rush hour right now.
That's true. That's the benefit for sure. And I know many clients I've talked to that are in California, they're loving working from home because they would have a 3-hour commute and they don't want to go back because they have so much more family time now because they're not, you know, commuting through LA or whatever it might be. And we take that for granted in Atlantic Canada that we don't have much of a commute normally, but we're spoiled, I think, on that regard.
Right, and a comment from Paula, who's interested in hearing more about assessing trustworthiness and has asked to share the charter information around this. I think we should mention that this webinar is being recorded by the Chamber and it will be shared with participants afterwards. But with that sort of logistical comment, Susan, do you want to talk anything more about assessing trustworthiness or building trustworthiness with your employees?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the reference in the presentation, it was from Natalie Doyle Oldfield's book on building trust. And I encourage you to, you know, order a copy of her book if you're interested in that particular topic. It's one of the best books I've read on building trust, and it's supporting a local business owner as well by doing that. But essentially in that checklist, it was things like showing up on time for meetings, doing what you say you're going to do by the time you say you're going to do it, asking people for input. It's a lot of things around communication and just reliability and you know, just being credible, doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it.
All right. And some sharing here from Deneen on your question, Susan, about you know, how you maintain connection when you're working virtually. Deneen says that they have a virtual weekly staff meeting and a social team activity on Friday for the last hour to stay connected. So those are some ideas from one participant on how people are staying connected as organizations while being remote.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I've heard a lot about these virtual happy hours and coffee meetings, and I think they're great to have, but don't put too much pressure on people to attend because people are tired too, that they might just be, you know, zoomed out by the end of the week and, you know, don't want to appear to be antisocial from your work colleagues, but it should be very much optional.
Okay, so we're coming up to the top of the hour, and at the Chamber, we try to build trustworthiness with people by starting and wrapping up on time. So I just have a few final comments. So we know that businesses need to focus on the new considerations and processes arising from COVID with respect to leadership and human resources practice. We recognize the goal is safe reintegration so we can all be productive and be there for both our employees, our communities, and each other. We want to thank everyone who's joined us. The Chamber will be hosting more webinars. I believe we've been having one at least every week with experts in various fields, leading our business community and helping us pioneer the new normal. If you're interested in other opportunities, head to halifaxchamber.com/events to see our lineup. As I mentioned earlier, this webinar has been recorded and it will be available to attendees. Usually goes out the next day, so since this is Friday, in your inbox on Monday. So thank you everyone again for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure. And thank you to the Chamber for hosting these. They're fantastic events. And the Chamber's been so supportive during this pandemic of small businesses. So that's so appreciated.
All right. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.